Hamilton Hall was packed. Every seat in the wide wooden auditorium was filled with students, faculty, and reporters. High up on the balcony, cameras blinked red as they streamed the event live across the country. Banners with bold text stretched. Across the stage, mathematics and public policy, where numbers meet nation. The room buzzed with energy. Students whispered excitedly. Professors adjusted their ties. And the sound of clicking keyboards echoed in the back rows. Senator? John Kennedy stepped in from the side hallway. His appearance was humble, an old gray suit, a plain red tie, and a slow, confident walk. At 74, he looked like someone who didn't care much about appearances, but knew how to command a room. His hair, silver and tousled, matched the sharpness in his eyes. He smiled slightly, then nodded to a few people in the front row. Some students clapped politely. Others folded their arms. A few wore T-shirts with protest slogans. This was a liberal university, and Senator Kennedy, a conservative icon, was not exactly a welcome guest. Still, he had come. Across the stage stood Professor Samuel Whitaker, tall, slim, and calm. He wore a fitted navy suit and black glasses that glinted under the spotlight. His hands were neatly folded in front of him. A longtime professor at Westford University, Whitaker was respected, even feared in academic circles. His political opinions were no secret: anti-populist, pro-globalism, and deeply progressive. He had written op-eds against Kennedy's policies and once called the senator a master of charm but a stranger to logic. Today, he had a plan. The event wasn't just a polite discussion. It was a setup, one that Whitaker had crafted for months. A live audience, a national stream, and one question so complex, so brutal, it would force Kennedy to crumble under pressure. It wouldn't just embarrass him, it would prove once and for all that populist leaders could not survive in the world of real logic and hard data. As the audience settled, Whitaker walked to the center of the stage and picked up the microphone. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Today, we welcome a guest who is no stranger to bold speeches or national debates, Senator John Kennedy." Polite claps, some cheers, a few loud boos. Kennedy stepped up to the podium. "Thank you for the warm welcome," he said with a smile, clearly amused. Though I'm not sure all of it was warm. Laughter. Even a few students smirked. Then Whitaker turned serious. "Senator," he said, walking over to a large digital screen behind him. "Before we begin our dialogue, I'd like to offer a simple challenge, just a bit of math. Since this event is about numbers and policy," Kennedy raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Go on, Professor." Whitaker clicked a remote. A long equation appeared on the screen, something involving compound interest, inflation adjustment, and fiscal year borrowing rates. Numbers flew across the board like a storm. Some students gasped. Even a few professors looked puzzled. "This," Whitaker said, "is a simplified version of a problem from the congressional budget. Office regarding debt sustainability over 30 years. Do you truly understand the impact of your policies? This should be easy." Silence. Cameras zoomed in on Kennedy's face. For a moment, he didn't move. He stared at the screen. The numbers were dense, the terms confusing. Viewers online started typing in live chats. He stumped. Why is he just standing there? Embarrassing. Then Kennedy slowly stepped forward. He looked at the equation again and again. Then, with calm precision, he took the microphone. "I'll admit, Professor," he said slowly, "I've seen potholes in Louisiana that were simpler than that." Laughter rippled across the room. But Kennedy wasn't joking anymore. "I'm not a mathematician," he continued. "I don't pretend to be. But I do know how budgets are shaped and how numbers like these can hide more than they reveal. Before I solve this, let me ask something. Where's the missing variable?" Whitaker looked confused. Kennedy pointed to the bottom line of the equation. "This assumes static interest rates and perfect debt rollover. But that's not how reality works. Where's the stress variable for international lending shifts? The audience shifted in their seats. Kennedy kept going. And why is the inflation rate pegged at 1.9% when your own university published a forecast of 3.2% just last month? Now Whitaker looked nervous. Kennedy walked over to the screen and tapped a number. This isn't just a math problem. It's a political trap. You framed a false equation to make me look foolish. But the real foolishness is pretending policy can be reduced to numbers you control. The room fell silent. No more whispers. No more laughter. Even the students in protest t-shirts stared forward, shocked. Kennedy turned back to the microphone. You wanted to embarrass me, Professor? But what you really did was expose how easy it is to hide truth inside numbers, and how dangerous that is for a country that depends on them. The silence lasted nearly 10 seconds. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon, the entire left side of the auditorium was applauding. Professor Whitaker stood frozen. Something had just shifted, and this was only the beginning. For the next 10 seconds, Hamilton Hall didn't move. Professor Whitaker stood frozen near the podium, his arms stiff at his sides. The digital board behind him still flashed the complex financial equation, but no one was looking at the numbers anymore. All eyes were on Senator Kennedy, the old man in a gray suit, now standing calmly at the center of a storm he hadn't created but had somehow taken control of. The applause grew. Hesitant at first, then louder. Some students who had smirked earlier were now glancing at each other, unsure. One girl in the front row mouthed, "He's not dumb." Cameras from major news outlets zoomed in. The live stream chat flooded with messages. He flipped the script. Kennedy just exposed something. What's he talking about with international lending shifts? Backstage, a young producer from a media network turned to her director. "Do we keep this going?" she asked nervously. "Absolutely." The director replied, "This is no longer about math. Something's happening." On stage, Kennedy stepped back and turned to the audience. "I didn't come here to play games," he said. "And I didn't come to be insulted, but I also didn't come to run away. You folks asked me to talk about numbers, so let's really talk." He pointed again to the formula. "This here, it's what we call a clean model. But in Washington, nothing is clean. Not the books, not the budgets, and definitely not the promises." He paused, looking directly at Whitaker. "You want the truth?" Kennedy said, his voice growing sharper. "The truth is, this exact equation, or a version of it, was used in a defense spending report 12 years ago. I remember because I questioned it in a closed hearing. The variables were changed, adjusted, hidden, and used to justify billions sent overseas." Whitaker blinked. "It's impossible." "That equation was mine. I wrote it." Kennedy nodded. "I know." "And you didn't just write it today?" The professor's face paled. The room was no longer a lecture hall. It had turned into a courtroom. In the third row, Maya Torres, an investigative journalist with Global Signal Media, pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her encrypted notes. Her contact in Washington had once mentioned a code name, Projection Delta, a classified formula used in defense economics to reallocate hidden budget surpluses. The name had been buried under layers of redacted files. And now Kennedy had just referenced a version of that equation in public, under the disguise of an academic challenge. She opened a new message to her source. "Kennedy just name-dropped projection delta. Is it the same math model used in Odessa funding?" The reply came almost instantly. "It's the exact same. He has it." Maya's pulse quickened. She turned on her recorder. Back on stage, Whitaker tried to recover. "You're making a dangerous accusation, Senator. Are you saying a university-level model I created is being used in black budget projects?" Kennedy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his leather folder and pulled out a printed page. Kay held it up for the cameras to see. The watermark read, "Classified for Senate intelligence use only." This he said, is page 42 of a 2011 Pentagon procurement audit. It uses your equation, your formatting, your variable structure. But the funds, they were directed through non-transparent systems. Some of them passed through institutions connected to this university's economic think tank. Gasps echoed from the crowd. A student shouted, "No way!" Another covered his mouth in disbelief. Whitaker stepped backward. "That's not public record." "How did you, Kennedy, cut him off?" "I don't play games, Professor. Been on the inside of this machine for a long time. Watch folks in suits hide bombs behind equations, lies behind algorithms. You may be good at math, but I'm better at what they never taught you, knowing when someone's lying with numbers." Silence again. Only the soft whir of cameras could be heard outside. A small group of student protesters holding signs like "Resist Kennedy" and "No to Fascist Math" watched the live stream on a tablet. One of them, a math major named A. Ellie Tran, lowered the device. "He didn't dodge the question," she said softly. "He used it to expose something else." Another student frowned. "Do we keep protesting?" Ellie didn't answer. Inside, Maya stood up. "Senator Kennedy," she called from the press row. "Are you saying Westford University is directly involved in classified military financing?" Kennedy looked at her. "I'm saying this university, knowingly or not, helped model the numbers that funded war machines. Professor Whitaker had stopped blinking. His hand gripped the edge of the lectern as Senator Kennedy's words echoed through the massive auditorium. The digital board still displayed the formula, the impossible math question that had now turned into something far more dangerous. This wasn't about interest rates anymore. It was about secrets. A chill passed through the room, though no one moved. Even the media crew, usually busy adjusting lenses or whispering into headsets, stood frozen. Everyone had heard what Kennedy said. The equation wasn't the trap. It was the map. It sounded poetic, almost rehearsed. But there was no doubt it hit the mark. Whitaker's lips parted slightly, as if trying to respond, but no words came. Out. The confident professor who had once written viral essays mocking conservative politics was now being challenged not with insults, but with documents, the kind no one was supposed to have. Senator Kennedy, still holding the page from the 2011 Pentagon audit, placed it gently on the podium beside him. "I'm not accusing you of treason, Professor," he said in a lower voice. "But I am saying this: when universities become silent partners in defense experiments, they lose their soul." A deep, uneasy murmur rippled across the crowd. From her seat near the stage, Maya Torres whispered into her phone. "Patch me through to the control room," she said to her producer. "We need a team digging into Whitaker's research funding. Anything under Delta Partnership or Urban Recovery Index." Her voice was calm, but her heart pounded a few rows back. Ellie Tran, the math student who had helped organize the protests, stared at the blackboard with new eyes. Her banner, rolled up under her arm, now felt strangely heavy. Shh. She leaned toward the friend beside her. "Doesn't this equation kind of match the model Dr. Rios showed us in Ethics of Finance?" she whispered. Her friend frowned. "I think so, but I thought it was for climate loan modeling." Ali's pulse quickened. On stage, Kennedy stepped away from the lectern. "He didn't need it anymore. You see," he said, addressing the audience. "The beauty of numbers is that they seem neutral, clean, cold, but in the wrong hands, they're anything but." He gestured to the board. This formula was used to justify how much money the government could borrow against projected inflation, but it was based on fake interest assumptions. The inflation didn't exist. Was created through economic reports crafted by academic teams funded by defense contractors. The room fell silent again. Then, a question pierced the quiet. "So why are you telling us this now?" It came from a young man in the third row, his voice unsure but steady. A freshman, maybe. No press badge. Just a student trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. Kennedy looked at him. For the first time that evening, his eyes softened. Because no one else will. He said, he turned to Whitaker. Tell them who gave you the research grant for this model. Tell them who paid for the study that led to the creation of these equations. Whitaker straightened, swallowing hard. I worked under a government research fund. It was listed under the Department of Public Finance. Kennedy nodded. That's true. But the money didn't start there. It came from a private group. A group connected to Elliot Vargo. The name dropped like a hammer. Gasps erupted. Maya stood up instinctively. Students turned to each other in confusion. Reporters leaned forward. Everyone had heard the name Elliot Vargo, former Pentagon analyst. Once the architect of post-9/11 budget strategies, then disappeared. Rumors swirled that he was behind a secret economic model used to reroute taxpayer funds to foreign proxy operations. Now, Kennedy had just linked him to the university, to Whitaker. And to the equation on the board, the room exploded in noise, questions, shouts, camera flashes. Whitaker finally spoke. You're manipulating this moment for headlines. I didn't know you didn't ask, Kennedy interrupted. We're too busy proving people like me can't do math. But while you were writing equations, people like Vargo were writing checks using your work to justify war budgets hidden in plain sight. Suddenly, the live stream glitched, then froze. Maya's screen went black. So did the feed on the university's YouTube channel. Students checked their phones. What happened? Someone asked. Kennedy turned slowly toward the cameras. They're cutting the feed. He walked to the edge of the stage. But this won't be hidden anymore. Just then, a loud bang echoed in the hall. The side doors slammed open. Security. Guards entered quickly, whispering into earpieces. One of them walked up to Whitaker and handed him a folded note. He read it. His face turned white. Event is over, he said quietly. Please exit calmly. But it was too late. The story was already loose in the world, and it was only just beginning. The crowd didn't move at first, even after Professor Whitaker announced that the event was over. No one got up. The cameras had gone dark, the live stream had frozen, and the stage lights dimmed slightly. But the air in Hamilton Hall was heavier than ever. It felt like history had cracked open in real time. And no one was ready to walk away from it. Senator Kennedy remained on stage quietly, collecting his papers. He didn't look at Whitaker again. He didn't need to. The silence of the professor said more than any denial ever could. At the back of the auditorium, Maya Torres was already moving. She slipped through the crowd and into the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. Control, it's Maya. Confirm we've got the full local recording. A crackle. Then a voice replied, affirmative. Signal cut externally. But our side cam kept rolling. We have it all. She exhaled. Good. Get legal ready. If Vargo's name is in this, we're in for a fight. She hung up and typed a quick note, send file to GSN Newsroom. Label it. Project Delta Exposure. Kennedy, Whitaker. Priority. Back inside the auditorium, security guards approached the stage carefully. One leaned in to speak with Senator Kennedy. But he waved him off with a polite shake of the head. I can find my own way out, he said. His tone was calm but heavy. The energy in his voice had shifted from fire to fatigue. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from talking, but from carrying truth too long without relief. Students watched him as he walked toward the side exit. Some whispered to each other, others didn't say a word. Ellie Tran, still seated in the third row, clutched her banner tightly in her hands. Did he just say our formulas were used to justify war budgets? She asked out loud, not really to anyone in particular. One of her friends nodded slowly. I think he did. And I think he proved it. In a small control room above the hall, 2 university technicians sat stunned. We lost all uplink. Everything. One said, it wasn't on our end. The other checked the router logs. That's not just a glitch, he whispered. We were blocked. External override. Someone cut the line from outside the school's network. The first technician turned toward him. You think this came from D.C.? They didn't speak the rest of the night. Downstairs, Professor Whitaker stood alone near the edge of the stage. His glasses were off. His eyes stared blankly at the chalkboard, where the math equation still faintly glowed. He didn't notice the student who walked up beside him until she spoke. Professor, it was Ellie. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. Is it true, she asked, that you worked with whoever this Vargo guy is? Whitaker didn't answer right away. I didn't know, he said finally. I submitted the model as part of a grant study. I was told it was for educational reform. The money came through clean channels, but Senator Kennedy said the variables matched the same ones used in covert funding audits. He nodded slowly. They do. I recognized the page he held. It was mine, but I never saw how it was used. Ellie looked down. And you were going to use that same model tonight? Just to humiliate someone? Whitaker looked at her but didn't defend himself. I didn't think he'd recognize it. That was the closest thing to an admission she would get. Outside the auditorium, a small crowd had gathered. Reporters, bloggers, curious students, all standing under the cold night sky, trying to make sense of what they just witnessed. Kennedy stepped out into the breeze. Flashbulbs lit the sidewalk. Microphones rushed toward him. Senator, was that equation part of a classified black budget program? Do you believe universities are being used as cover for military experiments? Did you really link Elliot Vargo to this institution? He didn't stop walking, but he said just one sentence before entering the waiting SUV. Ask your own professors, he said. They know what they signed. The door shut. The SUV pulled away. Inside her office, Maya Torres reviewed the footage again. At the moment, Kennedy said the equation wasn't the trap, it was the map. She paused the video, zoomed in. The equation itself seemed to change meaning. It was no longer numbers and letters. It was a fingerprint, a map of decisions, lies, and wars. She whispered to herself, this isn't a story about math. It's about how power hides inside truth. And how few people ever dare to do the math. She clicked send and uploaded the report to her editorial team. The headline was ready. Senator Kennedy versus the silence equation. How one night exposed the war behind the numbers and the real storm hadn't even started. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Senator Kennedy accuses University of hiding covert war funding. It's the equation that shook Washington. Live debate goes dark after a defense budget leak. Across TV channels, digital newsrooms, and social media feeds, people were trying to understand what had happened in Hamilton Hall the night before. The story had gone viral not because Kennedy had answered a math question, but because in doing so, he had revealed something deeper. That equations used to fund wars had been written inside college classrooms at Westford University. The campus was a war zone of opinions. Students crowded cafeterias and sidewalks, arguing, debating, and checking their phones for updates. Posters once meant to protest Kennedy's visit had been torn down or scribbled over with the word Delta. In a quiet corner of the library, Ellie Tran sat hunched over her laptop. Her face was pale, eyes red from a sleepless night. She was supposed to be working on her midterm, but instead she had pulled up a research archive. Her fingers hovered. Over the keyboard dot she searched. Urban Recovery Index plus Elliot Vargo. One result. A PDF dot, she opened it, and there it was. A funding report from 10 years ago, listing Professor Whitaker as the lead research consultant. The money came from a group called DPC Analytics, which was traced to a defense subcontractor. Under the name Stratuscore, she clicked through the pages. Page 14 listed experimental fiscal modeling for national infrastructure projects in Eastern Europe. And in small print below, it read, Model format adapted from compound drift equation. Asset projection variant, A.S. Whitaker. Westford University. Ellie felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just theory anymore. This was real. Meanwhile, Maya Torres was preparing for her biggest segment ever. The Global Signal newsroom in D.C. was in overdrive, producers running scripts, lighting teams, adjusting cameras, and Maya standing in the center, holding her earpiece. "You're going. Live in 30 seconds. The producer called Dot. She took a breath. This wasn't just another investigative story. This was career-defining and possibly career-ending. The red light blinked. She began. "Good evening. I'm Maya Torres with Global Signal. And tonight, we bring you an exclusive report. How a single math equation written in a university hall became the foundation for a decade of hidden war financing." She paused. The screen behind her lit up with the now famous shot of Kennedy pointing to the board. What Senator Kennedy revealed last night wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was a roadmap. "Our investigation confirms that the equation used to challenge him was identical to models listed and classified. Pentagon audits between 2010 and 2013. Audits tied to a mysterious analyst named Elliot Vargo." She looked directly into the camera. "Tonight, we name names." Back in Baton Rouge, Kennedy sat on his back porch with a cup of black coffee. No suit, no tie, just jeans, a flannel shirt, and the hum of cicadas in the background. The sun hadn't risen yet. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again, then again. Finally, he answered. It was his chief of staff. "Sir, you're trending. #1 worldwide. Your Senate email is overloaded. And there's a call request." From Zurich, Kennedy raised an eyebrow. "Zurich. Yes, sir. A reporter with the Atlantic Ledger says they have documents tying the Delta model to offshore accounts and potentially to reconstruction contracts in Crimea." Kennedy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Call them back. I'll talk. But only if it's live." At Westford, Professor Whitaker had locked his office door. The blinds were drawn. His desk was covered in papers. He had pulled out every document, every funding report, every email from the last 12 years. There were symbols, equations, grant memos, bank transfers. The same phrase appeared again and again. Model Variant A. It was the seed, and he had planted it. He reached for his old phone. Not his university phone, not his mobile, the old one. The one he kept hidden. He dialed a number he hadn't used in 7 years. It rang once, then a voice answered. "No, hello. No name. Did you talk?" The voice asked. "I didn't know what it was being used for," Whitaker said. He had the documents. He named Vargo. There was a long silence. Then the voice said, "Then we need to finish what we started." The call ended. Whitaker sat there, shaking slightly. He looked again at the equation written in pencil on his WHITEBOARD. It didn't just represent compound interest. It represented buried money, ghost wars. And now the unraveling of everything in the dead of night across the Atlantic. A plane touched down quietly in Geneva. No press, no cameras. But inside the airport's private terminal, a man in a gray coat and wire-rimmed glasses stepped onto Swiss soil for the first time in over a decade. He walked with a cane, not because he needed it, but because he wanted people to think he was fragile. He wasn't. His mind moved faster than ever. Elliot Vargo had returned. Inside a waiting car, he opened a secure tablet. Headlines blinked across the screen. Global Signal, Senator Kennedy uncovers. Hidden war model Westford professor, silent after explosive budget leak. What is Project Delta and why has the government never denied it? Vargo leaned back in the seat, his jaw tightening. He hadn't been mentioned publicly in years. And now, one senator from Louisiana had said his name on live television, and the world was digging. He whispered to himself, "You weren't supposed to find that equation." At Global Signal headquarters, Maya Torres sat in a glass conference room, watching the analytics surge. Her breaking story had been syndicated by over 50 outlets in 1 hour. The video had hit 8 million views. Her email was flooded with whistleblowers and former Pentagon aides. Some anonymous owned terrified, she clicked on one new message with the subject line, Delta variant, a source ready to talk. The sender used the alias Cold Cipher. Attached was a single sentence. The formula was tested on domestic lending systems before it was ever applied abroad. You've only seen the foreign part. Maya blinked. This meant the equation hadn't just been used to justify war. It had been used on American citizens to manipulate housing loans, medical budgets, even disaster relief. She closed the laptop. Her voice was tight when she turned to her producer. Book a segment for 7 p.m. We're going deeper. Senator Kennedy was back in D.C., seated behind closed doors in a secure conference room at the Capitol. 3 Intelligence Committee members sat across from him, tired, irritated, and clearly under pressure. You didn't have clearance to say that name on camera. One senator snapped. I had the truth. Kennedy replied flatly. This isn't how we do things, Senator, another added. There are protocols. Fargo hasn't been officially tied to any active program in over 12 years. Kennedy reached into his case and pulled out another page. This one had handwritten notes marked by initials. Then explain why his signature appears on this 2015 memo regarding adaptive modeling for foreign reconstruction contracts. The senators exchanged glances. One of them, the youngest, leaned forward. You realize this isn't just about math anymore? You've set off something. Markets are reacting. Swiss franc surged this morning. Ukraine officials are demanding answers. The IMF wants a hearing. Kennedy nodded. Then it's working. At Westford, students staged a sit-in outside Professor Whitaker's office. They weren't protesting against Kennedy anymore. They were demanding transparency from their own university. Inside, Whitaker watched the commotion on his phone. His hands trembled. There were emails coming in now from faculty. Some were supportive, some threatening. But all of them shared the same fear that this wasn't over. He opened his laptop and began typing a resignation letter halfway through. He stopped. He opened a private email inbox instead, one he hadn't used in years. There were old messages from someone labeled. Only EV1 in particular caught his eye. It was from 2014. The subject line read, "If this ever goes public." He clicked. Inside was a document full of names. Not just Fargo's, but senators, defense contractors, university trustees, bankers. Everyone who knew the formula wasn't just for math. That night, Maya went live again. This story isn't about a political debate, she began. It's about a system designed to look harmless, built on math, finance, and public trust. But underneath, it's a shadow economy, built by experts, hidden by academics, and now exposed by a single equation. She turned to the screen behind her. This time, it showed not just Kennedy, but Professor Whitaker. We've obtained leaked documents showing Whitaker's research was part of a multi-institutional modeling network. A network that received direct funding from intermediaries connected to military finance channels. The screen flipped again. This time to a name no one had seen in public for years. Elliot Vargo, strategic analyst, RET. Maya continued. Our team has learned that Vargo landed in Geneva this morning. And sources tell us he may not be there alone. She leaned forward. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a reckoning. In Geneva, Vargo stood in a high-rise apartment, staring down at the lights of the city. His phone buzzed. A voice, the same one that had once funded. Whitaker's work spoke calmly. They're coming for you, Vargo replied coldly. Let them. Snow began to fall over Geneva, covering the glass rooftops in silence. Inside a luxury hotel overlooking Lake Leman, Elliot Vargo paced slowly. Watching the city disappear under white dot, his reflection in the window looked older than he remembered. A man whose math had moved governments, now hunted by the very numbers he created. He picked up the phone, set up the call, he said with Kennedy. Before they get to him, in Washington, Senator John Kennedy stood outside the Capitol. Rotunda, coat open, breath visible in the cold. He had just received the call from Vargo's handler, encrypted. It's untraceable and terrifying in its calm. Vargo wants to talk, alone. No press, no staff. Kennedy said only one word. When? 3 hours later, inside a secure embassy room in Geneva, the two men sat face dash to dash face. No security, no media, just silence. Vargo studied Kennedy carefully, the way a physicist watches a ticking bomb. You were never supposed to find it, said, almost like an apology. Kennedy didn't blink. But I did. Vargo nodded slowly. I designed Delta to stabilize post-conflict regions, to rebuild where bombs fell. But it became something else. Governments used it to mask economic transfers, war money hidden inside health budgets, education funds, even disaster relief. He looked down at his hands. I told them it wouldn't hold forever. Kennedy leaned forward. So why run? Why let them bury you? Vargo gave a small laugh, the kind that sounds more like a sigh. Because the people who funded it don't live on record. And if I spoke ... I wouldn't live at all. There was silence between them. Then Kennedy pulled out a folder. This is from Whitaker, he said. He finally came clean. The names, the offshore accounts, the secondary formulas, Vargo's. I scanned the papers. Eh? His face grew pale. They replicated Delta. He muttered multiple times. Eh? And they attached it to civilian banks. He stood up suddenly, rattled. It's not just about war anymore. That math's embedded in domestic policy. We're looking at a false economy. It's one that could collapse if the public loses trust. Kennedy stood too. So help me stop it. Across the Atlantic. Maya Torres was preparing for what would become the most viewed live interview in American news history. She stood at her desk, hands on the table, the studio buzzing with tension. Her team had just received a leak anonymously. But she recognized the handwriting in the scan. It was Vargo's. The note read, "The math was never the weapon." The silence was, "Break it." Attached was a zip file, encrypted documents showing the Delta variant had been embedded in emergency COVID loan structures, creating artificial inflation triggers that were still active in U.S. cities. It was the final proof. She looked into the camera. Tonight, we reveal the full scope of Project Delta. Not just a defense model, but the architecture of economic control. How a university formula was hijacked to influence everything from aid to war. At Westford University, Ellie Tran stepped onto the library steps and looked at the crowd that had gathered. Students held candles, signs, and questions. She raised the folder in her hands. "This is the document Professor Whitaker left behind," she said. "It doesn't just name people. It shows how knowledge was turned into silence, and how silence became a weapon." No one interrupted. She took a deep breath. "We're going to teach the truth now." Back in Geneva, Vargo lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years. Across from him, Kennedy folded the last page of the report. "They'll come for both of us," Vargo said. Kennedy nodded. "They already are." "Then what's your plan?" Kennedy looked him in the eye. "Expose the math. Let the country decide who they trust." A long pause. Then Vargo, for the first time in years, smiled. "Then let's make it count." 3 days later, Kennedy appeared before the Senate committee again. This time, not with accusations, but with documents, equations, and signatures. He placed them all on the table. "This isn't about politics," he said. "This is about control. And the system's built to hide it." Behind him, the media watched in stunned silence. And far above the chamber, in a quiet server room at Global Signal, Maya's team pressed upload. The Delta file's full archive public. Downloadable, unstoppable. And so the truth spread. Through college campuses, through Senate offices, through headlines, back channels, and classrooms. The math was no longer hidden. The room had fallen silent once. Now the whole world was listening. End of story.